Welcome to the Real Money Pathway, where I share my journey from financial collapse to lasting wealth. I'm David Kim, and I'll guide you through practical strategies that transform my finances and can transform yours too. Let's build your pathway to financial freedom. The content of this podcast is provided for general information purposes only and do not constitute financial advice. Listeners should not act upon the content or information here without first seeking appropriate advice from a financial professional. Welcome back to Real Money Pathway. I'm David Kim, author of The Real Money Guide, the missing manual for financial recovery. Throughout our first 10 episodes, we've covered everything from my financial collapse to rebuilding emergency funds, managing cash flow, handling debt, rebuilding banking relationships, of course, reestablishing credit, and developing some small but powerful financial habits. Today's episode is really special to me because we're focusing on a crucial element of financial recovery that's really often overlooked: finding and working with financial mentors. And I couldn't think of a better way to explore this topic than bringing on someone who's played that exact role in my own journey. I'm super happy to welcome Casey, my financial mentor and now best friend, who opened his home to me during what was my darkest personal and financial periods of my life. And he provided both that practical guidance and as well as emotional support that I needed at the time that I needed it the most. So Casey, thank you for joining us. I've talked about you in previous episodes, in my book, everywhere I can. So I'm excited for our listeners to hear directly from you.
Thanks for having me, David. It's been incredible watching your journey from these early days sitting at my kitchen table to where you are now, hosting this podcast and helping others navigate their own financial challenges.
Yeah, those kitchen table conversations quite literally changed the trajectory of my financial life. Before we dive deeper into our story, though, I want to give our listeners some context about why financial mentorship matters so much during recovery. When rebuilding after significant setbacks, information alone isn't enough. Books, articles, and courses, they provide knowledge, but mentors and friends provide something equally or even more valuable. It's a perspective, accountability, as well as some personalized guidance for yourself based on your specific situation. They see those blind spots that you could easily miss and also provide that encouragement when progress seems really, really slow.
What stands out most from those early days, David, was seeing someone with tremendous knowledge, your MBA and financial planning background, who was struggling not with information, but implementation and perspective. You knew financial concepts, but translating them into practical actions during crisis is completely different. I remember you had a stack of financial books by your bed that was gathering dust. The gap wasn't knowledge. You had a ton of knowledge. It was having someone to walk alongside you during the actual implementation, someone who could provide both accountability and encouragement through the inevitable setbacks.
That is so true. I had read and owned dozens and dozens of financial books, but none of them really address the emotional and practical realities of rebuilding after bankruptcy. They usually focused on just optimization techniques for stable situations, not really recovery strategies for financial trauma.
Exactly. Most financial advice assumes a stable foundation. When the foundation is shattered, you need guidance that acknowledges both the practical and emotional dimensions of recovery. I think that's where mentorship provides something unique. It's personalized to your specific circumstances rather than generic advice for ideal situations.
One thing that made your mentorship particularly valuable was that you weren't just providing that theoretical guidance. For me, you were modeling that financial behavior daily. As I was living in your home, I observed how intentionally you approached money decisions and everything from grocery shopping to investments.
I think that's an important point about effective mentorship. It's not just about what someone says. It's not about what someone is portraying, but what they consistently do. Financial behaviors are deeply habitual, and seeing someone implement healthy patterns daily creates more impact than occasional conversations alone. That's why we spent so much time at my kitchen table, and even today, we're sitting at the same table. When I noticed in these early days was how much shame you carried about your financial situation. It was this big weight on your shoulders. You accomplished so much professionally, me being a part of some of that as well, and facing bankruptcy. felt like a profound personal failure. And I could see that. Part of my role was helping separate your financial circumstances from your identity and worth.
For sure, that shame reduction was absolutely critical. I remember feeling like my bankruptcy just defined me completely, something I had been trying to avoid for literally decades, but it had actually gotten to me, and that I was a financial failure rather than someone who had experienced financial failure. Your consistent message that this is something that's happened, not who you are, created that space for recovery that wouldn't have existed otherwise.
I've seen that same pattern with others I've mentored. Financial setbacks create identity crisis for many people, especially those who previously defined success through financial achievements. Effective mentorship addresses both practical strategies and these deeper identity questions. One thing I observed in our early conversations was your tendency towards all or nothing thinking. Go big or go home. You felt like if you couldn't immediately replace your six-figure income, then smaller actions weren't worthwhile. Couldn't be further from the truth. Those small wins help build momentum. Breaking that thought pattern was essential for creating sustainable progress.
Oh, I remember that so clearly when you suggested saving $25 a week. My initial reaction was almost dismissive. I'm like, what? Like, how could something that small even matter when I previously managed like substantially large investments? That's the perspective shift from grand gestures to consistent small actions that completely transform my approach.
And that's where I think mentors provide unique value during recovery. They help recalibrate expectations while maintaining hope, having someone to talk to while you're going through a very difficult time. Recovery isn't about immediately returning to previous peaks. Oftentimes, that's not possible. It's about establishing new foundations through consistent actions aligned with your current reality. For our listeners thinking about finding mentors, I think it's important to recognize that financial mentorship provides something different than professional financial advice. Advisors typically focus on optimization within existing situations, while mentors help navigate fundamental changes while providing emotional support alongside practical guidance.
That's such an important distinction. During my recovery, I needed both practical strategies and also someone who understood the emotional weight of financial rebuilding. Professional advisors, they serve valuable roles, but mentors provide that unique combination of guidance, accountability, and emotional support that proves essential during significant transitions.
And I think that the relationship goes both ways. While I provided guidance based on my experiences, I learned tremendously from walking alongside you during your recovery. Every conversation we had, it was a learning experience for both of us. Mentorship creates mutual growth rather than one way transmission.
Let's talk about how people can actually find those financial mentors during recovery periods. Casey, our relationship developed organically through our existing friendship, but not everyone has obvious mentor candidates in their immediate circle. From your experience, both as my mentor and guiding others, as well as my friend for years before, what qualities should people look for when identifying potential financial mentors?
That's a great question, David. I think there are several key qualities that make someone an effective financial mentor, and particularly during recovery periods. First, look for demonstrated financial behavior rather than just financial knowledge. Those are two very separate things. It's easy to have the knowledge, but it's hard to put into practice, especially in your real life world. Someone who consistently implements sound principles in their own life provides more valuable guidance than someone who simply knows concepts. When you lived with me, you observed daily patterns, how I approached spending decisions, saving habits, and financial discussions that reinforced the principles we discussed explicitly. Second, find someone with perspective beyond your current situation. Effective mentors have navigated different financial phases and understand the progression from where you are to where you want to be. They're not necessarily wealthy by any means, but they demonstrated financial stability through various circumstances. Third, prioritize value alignment over specific financial approaches. Different mentors might implement varying strategies based on their circumstances and personalities, but underlying values like intentionality, long term perspective, and balanced priorities create the foundation for effective guidance, regardless of specific techniques.
Wow, those are excellent points, Casey, because that first point I felt like a dagger for me because it was having that financial knowledge, but not having that demonstrated financial behavior. It's tough to hear. But I'd add that finding someone who creates psychological safety to even say those kind of things around financial discussions proved absolutely critical in our experience. With you, Casey, I never felt judged for my financial mistakes, which allowed really honest conversations that wouldn't have happened in environments where I felt I needed to project financial success or hide my vulnerabilities.
Absolutely. Showing vulnerabilities and not knowing what's coming next or how someone will react is often the first fear response and when you find yourself in trouble. Psychological safety creates the foundation for honest conversation, which is essential for effective mentorship. Without it, people tend to present sanitized versions of their situation that makes it look like they are in a lot better place than what they really are, limiting the mentor's ability to provide relevant guidance. Being honest, being open, finding that mentor, and really sharing your story and being vulnerable is a great way to have that first step to move forward. For those seeking mentors, where would you suggest they begin looking, David? Our relationship formed through friendship, but what about people without obvious candidates in their immediate circle?
That is a great question. I've found several promising places to identify potential financial mentors. Community financial education programs, often from nonprofits and foundations, attract both those seeking knowledge and those also willing to share their experiences. These settings create often natural opportunities to identify individuals with both knowledge and teaching orientation. Religious organizations frequently include members with both financial stability and service mindset. Many faith based communities offer financial education or support groups that can lead to meaningful mentoring relationships. There's also professional associations sometimes that have formal or informal mentorship programs that extend beyond career guidance, that include financial aspects, particularly for entrepreneurs or freelancers managing variable income. And another often overlooked one is online communities that are focused on financial topics. They can usually develop into meaningful mentoring relationships when approached intentionally. While many online interactions remain surface level, deeper connections can form through consistent participation and private conversation. Casey, from your perspective as someone who has mentored multiple people beyond just me, how do you recognize when someone is genuinely open to that mentorship versus just wanting some quick financial answers?
David, that's an insightful question. I look for several indicators that someone is ready for genuine mentorship rather than just tactical advice. They demonstrate willingness to examine underlying patterns rather than just addressing symptoms. When our conversations move beyond immediate financial challenges to the behaviors and beliefs creating those situations, I knew meaningful mentorship was possible. They take responsibility for their situation without excessive self blame. Effective mentoring requires balance between accountability and self compassion. Both extreme victimhood narratives and harsh self criticism undermine productive mentoring relationships. They demonstrate commitment through action between conversations. When advice has been given, being able to take that and apply it directly has the most impact and also builds on that mentorship. Our most productive mentoring periods occurred when you implemented, discussed concepts, and returned with specific experiences, what you learned from those implementations. And then we could take that next steps and also coming with questions rather than theoretical discussions alone.
Those are excellent indicators. For our listeners seeking mentors, I think it's important to recognize that effective mentoring relationships develop gradually rather than forming immediately. Casey, our relationship evolved over years, but also over months of increasingly valuable interactions financially before reaching those deep mentoring connections we eventually established.
Absolutely. Mentoring relationships require trust developed through consistent interactions over time. It is very difficult to share everything out the gate. So you start small, have those small conversations, and build on that relationship, building that trust. And it takes time. This is not a sprint, this is a marathon. It's a journey to long term financial recovery. For those seeking mentors, patience and incremental approach building often proves more effective than immediately requesting formal mentoring arrangements. It's something that grows organically. I also think it's important to distinguish between different types of financial mentors based on their specific strengths. Some excel at practical implementation strategies, others at emotional support during financial stress, and still others at long term perspective development. Recognizing these differences help identify the right mentor for your specific needs.
That's a very crucial point, Casey. During my financial recovery journey, I eventually developed relationships with a couple mentors offering different strengths. Casey, you provided that critical early foundation with practical guidance and emotional support, while my later mentor offered specialized knowledge in areas like business development and investment strategies as my needs evolved. For listeners currently searching for mentors, what practical suggestion would you offer about making that initial connection in a respectful way?
I would suggest starting with specific, limited requests rather than asking someone to become your comprehensive financial mentor immediately. Begin with focused questions about your particular aspects of their experience that might relate to your situation. Then build from there based on their receptiveness. Also, demonstrate value exchange from the beginning. While mentors typically don't expect financial compensation, showing appreciation through attentiveness, implementation of suggestions, and appropriate expressions of gratitude create mutually beneficial relationships rather than one sided extraction.
Once you've identified potential mentors and established initial connections, building productive, ongoing relationships requires intention and structure. Casey, our mentoring relationship developed certain patterns that maximized its effectiveness. Could you share your perspective on what made our working relationship particularly productive?
Looking back, several elements strengthen our mentoring relationship. We established regular connection points without creating burdensome obligations. Our Sunday evening conversations became a consistent touch point that provided accountability without becoming overwhelming for either one of us, and we were still able to carry on with everything that we were doing within our lives. This created continuity between interactions rather than disconnected episodic discussions. We maintained clear focus during conversations rather than scattered discussions. While we certainly had broader life conversations, our financial mentoring interactions typically centered around specific questions, challenges, or implementation experiences rather than generic discussions about money. We developed a shared language around financial concepts that created communication efficiency. Terms like value alignment, intentional spending, and momentum threshold became shorthand references that carried significant meaning based on previous discussions. We implemented a simple preparation structure where you'd reflect on specific questions before our conversations, creating more productive starting points than unprepared interactions would have provided.
Those elements made such a difference. I'd also add that documentation played a crucial role in our mentoring effectiveness. Taking notes during our conversations and reviewing them between meetings helped me capture insights that might have otherwise been lost. Those kitchen table notes eventually evolved into early versions of frameworks that I now share through this podcast. From the mentee perspective, I found several approaches particularly valuable. Number one, coming prepared with specific questions rather than general concerns created a much more focused guidance. When I asked how should I approach my credit rebuilding, we had we had productive but somewhat general discussions. But when I asked should I apply for this secured card with these specific terms rather than another, we had much more actionable conversations. Second, reporting implementation experiences rather than just discussing the concepts accelerated progress significantly. Sharing both successes and challenges from applying previous guidance created momentum rather than theoretical discussion alone. And finally, but really importantly, being completely honest about my situation, including aspects that felt embarrassing or shameful, allowed relevant guidance rather than advice based on sanitized versions of my reality. This transparency proved particularly important around emotional responses to money situations.
Those approaches definitely strengthen our work together. One of the things that I've always told my kids about honesty, and honesty is the foundation for everything. If we don't talk about it, there's no way to know what the path forward is, or we can't help support each other if we don't talk about it. So, those honest conversations. I'd also highlight the importance of mutual feedback in effective mentoring relationships. When you shared how certain guidance has proven particularly helpful or wasn't quite fitting your situation, it allowed me to refine my approach rather than continuing patterns that weren't serving you optimally. For mentoring relationships to remain productive long term, evolution based on changing needs and circumstances proves essential. What happens today may not be the same situation you're in a year from now, so being able to evolve and adapt is critical to the success of mentorship. Our early conversations focused heavily on basic stabilization and psychological aspects of financial recovery, while later discussions addressed more sophisticated topics as your situation improved.
That evolution was so important. As my financial situation stabilized and basic recovery systems were established, our conversations just naturally shifted towards growth strategies and longer term planning. Without that evolution, the mentoring relationship might have stagnated despite its early effectiveness. Casey, from your perspective, what makes someone a good mentee? Like, what approaches helped me receive maximum benefit from your guidance?
David, that's an excellent question. Several qualities make someone particularly receptive to mentoring: genuine implementation orientation rather than just informed collection. You consistently took concepts from our discussions and applied them before our next conversation, creating experience based questions rather than theoretical ones. Appropriate balance between being receptive and independent thinking. Effective mentees consider guidance thoughtfully rather than either dismissing it immediately or accepting it uncritically. Your approach of testing concepts through implementation rather than just intellectual analysis created valuable learning cycles. Another key aspect of a mentee is willingness to discuss both successes and setbacks. When mentees share only positive outcomes, mentors can't provide guidance addressing the inevitable challenges that arise during implementation. Your openness about both progress and difficulties allowed more relevant support. Recognition that mentoring relationships involve mutual benefit rather than one sided extraction. While I've provided guidance based on my experiences, watching your implementation and hearing your insights enrich my own financial perspective significantly.
Those are excellent points. I think it's also important for mentees to recognize that there are appropriate boundaries in those mentoring relationships. Financial mentors provide guidance and perspective rather than directive control or even responsibility for those outcomes. Maintaining this distinction creates healthier relationships than dependency patterns that sometimes develop. For our listeners currently working with mentors or considering establishing such relationship, what suggestions would you offer about maintaining appropriate expectations while maximizing benefits?
I would like to emphasize several important principles. Recognize that mentors provide perspective based on their experience rather than universal solutions applicable to all situations. Effective mentees consider this guidance within their specific circumstances rather than seeking precise roadmaps to follow uncritically. Understand that mentors typically can't provide the same comprehensive support that professional advisors might offer in their specialized areas. While mentors offer valuable guidance, complex situations often require additional professional assistance for optimal outcomes. Appreciate that mentoring relationships thrive through mutual respect. While mentors provide guidance based on greater experience in specific areas, effective relationships maintain fundamental equality between individuals sharing different perspectives. View mentoring as a complementary resource within broader financial development rather than a comprehensive solution to all challenges. The most effective mentees integrate mentoring alongside appropriate education, professional advice, and personal reflection rather than relying exclusively on any single resource. For those building mentoring networks, I'd suggest focusing on complementary strengths rather than redundant perspectives. Look for mentors who bring different experiences, specialized knowledge areas, or contrasting approaches rather than simply reinforcing existing perspectives.
Absolutely. The varied perspectives across my mentoring relationships created valuable cross pollination that wouldn't have developed through isolated connections. Concepts from one mentor often applied in unexpected ways to challenges addressed with another, creating synthesis beyond what sequential relationships might have provided. As financial situations change through recovery, growth, and eventual stability, mentoring needs also evolve significantly. KCR relationship transformed substantially from those early post bankruptcy days through later stages as my situation improved. Could you share your perspective on how mentoring relationships should adapt through those different financial phases?
That's a fascinating aspect of long term mentoring relationships. They either evolve to match changing circumstances or gradually lose relevance despite their earlier value. Several transitions typically occur through different recovery phases. Early recovery mentoring typically emphasizes emotional support alongside basic stabilization strategies. David, during your initial post bankruptcy period, our conversations focus heavily on processing financial trauma while establishing a fundamental system for essential stability. Mid recovery, relationships often shift towards implementation guidance for rebuilding specific financial components. As your situation stabilized, our discussions evolved toward credit rebuilding strategies, income development approaches, and systematic saving implementation. Later recovery mentoring frequently emphasizes growth strategies alongside continued recovery components. Our conversations gradually incorporated investment approaches, business development strategies, and career advancement opportunities as your foundation strengthened. Finally, post recovery relationships often transform toward legacy and optimization rather than recovery specific guidance. David, as your financial situation moved from rebuilding to growth, our interactions and our friendship evolved toward long term planning, wealth building strategies, and eventually giving approaches.
I still remember swapping stories and strategies of day trading and different kinds of swing trading strategies, and even sharing our successes and failures, right, through those. Because, I wouldn't recommend day trading for most anyone because those losses can be pretty tremendous without the right discipline and process. But that evolution that you talked about proved essential for maintaining relevant guidance throughout my journey as well as yours. Without that adaptation, our mentoring relationship might have stagnated despite its early effectiveness. As my needs changed, your approach shifted naturally to address emerging priorities rather than continuing patterns that no longer served my situation. An important aspect of this evolution involved changing the balance between emotional and technical components of our discussions. Our early conversations, like you mentioned, addressed significant emotional aspects of both personal and financial recovery, while our later interactions focused increasingly on technical optimization and psychological barriers diminished. Casey, from your perspective, what indicators suggest mentoring relationships need evolution to remain valuable through those changing circumstances?
Several signs typically indicate mentoring relationships require adaptation to maintain relevance. Conversations begin feeling repetitive rather than generating new insights or applications. When discussions cover familiar territory without advancing understanding or implementation, evolution typically becomes necessary for continued value. Implementation has progressed beyond current guidance scope toward areas requiring different expertise or perspective. As your financial situation improved beyond basic recovery, certain topics exceeded my own experience, indicating need for additional specialized mentoring relationships. Questions shift from how implementation increased toward why or what next strategic considerations. This transition often signals progression from tactical guidance needs towards strategic direction requiring different mentoring approaches. Finally, mentees demonstrate increasing capabilities in previously challenging areas, requiring less direct guidance and more collaborative exploration. As your financial confidence and competence grew, our relationship naturally shifted from directive guidance towards mutual exploration of more advanced concepts. Tying back to that day trading, we had so many different situations there. And it was funny because those early days, we probably had more losses than wins, but through that we learned and we learned together. And that really ties into that mutual advancement of our relationship whenever it comes to financial growth.
That was fun, yes. And winning is definitely more fun than losing, but you have to lose to learn and to protect your losses and stop losses. Those indicators that you talked about definitely reflected my experience as our relationship evolved. For listeners currently working with mentors, recognizing these transition points creates opportunities for relationship evolution rather than potential stagnation of premature conclusion. Something I found particularly valuable was your willingness to acknowledge when certain questions exceeded your specific experience. It's okay, right, to say, I don't know, and recommending additional mentoring sources rather than providing limited guidance beyond your expertise. This approach maintained relationship integrity, all the while ensuring that I received appropriate guidance across different needs.
Yes, it's important to recognize when the conversation goes beyond your own experience, and you're absolutely right. Saying I don't know, rather than giving bad or poor advice based on a topic that I don't know, it's important to recognize that and share that because that's going to help build trust. And that boundary recognition proves essential for effective long term mentoring. Acknowledging limits while facilitating connections to additional resources creates more value than attempting guidance beyond one's experience. By connecting you with specialized mentors in areas like equity compensation or business scaling, I supported your continued growth without overextending my own guidance.
As my recovery progressed, opportunities to contribute value rather than only receive guidance became so much more and increasingly important to me to be able to give back and for maintaining that balanced interaction rather than just continued dependence patterns. For our listeners in established mentoring relationships, recognizing appropriate evolution opportunities helps maintain value through changing circumstances. Be proactive about the changing needs that often preserve relationships, but then that might otherwise diminish in relevance despite their early importance. Casey, what advice would you offer mentees then about facilitating productive evolution in established relationships rather than outgrowing them just entirely?
I'd suggest several approaches for effectively evolving mentoring relationships. Communicate changing needs explicitly rather than expecting mentors to recognize them automatically. Your periodic relationship reflection conversations about how our interactions could best serve your evolving situation created natural adaptation opportunities that unspoken transitions might have missed. Acknowledge changing dynamics openly, including areas where dependence has transformed toward independence or reciprocity. These honest conversations create relationship redefinition rather than awkward maintenance of outdated patterns. Express appreciation for foundation elements while focusing current interactions on evolving needs. Recognizing the continued value of earlier guidance while shifting current discussions toward emerging priorities maintain relationship continuity through significant transitions. Consider intentional completion for relationships that have fulfilled their purpose rather than artificial maintenance. Some mentoring relationships serve specific recovery phases perfectly, while naturally concluding as those phases complete. And that's completely okay. Creating appropriate closure rather than forced continuation.
Those approaches support such important transitions. I'd add that documentation of mentoring impact through different phases creates meaningful perspective that supports appropriate evolution. My practice of periodically reviewing how our relationship had shaped my journey provided valuable context for discussions about changing needs and interaction patterns.
Absolutely. That documentation practice also supports the eventual transition many meaningful mentoring relationships experience, from predominantly receiving guidance to providing it for others. Your current work through this podcast represents powerful extension of concepts first explored during our early kitchen table conversations, creating legacy impact beyond our direct relationship.
For sure, that transition towards becoming a mentor myself has created such meaningful completion of that cycle. The guidance initially received through our relationship now extends to others facing similar challenges, creating impact far beyond what our individual interactions alone could have accomplished. For listeners currently receiving mentoring during financial recovery, recognizing this potential future transition can provide valuable perspective during challenging periods. The insights gained through current struggles often become precisely what others need and what others need to hear during their future challenges, creating meaning through difficulty that extends beyond just personal recovery alone.
That meaning creation represents one of the most powerful aspects of effective mentoring relationships. The guidance that supports individual recovery ultimately extends to others through subsequent mentoring connections, creating exponential impact across expanding relationship networks rather than isolated individual benefits.
Today's episode explored finding and working with financial mentors, with Casey providing invaluable perspective from our own mentoring relationship. Our takeaway today offers just a starting point for establishing your own mentoring connections. We recommend focusing on two specific actions this week to start that journey. First, identify one financial area where guidance from someone with more experience would prove particularly valuable. Rather than seeking comprehensive mentoring immediately, this focused approach creates specific connection opportunities aligned with your most pressing needs. Second, identify 3 potential mentors within your own existing network who you see that demonstrate qualities valuable for your own specific situation. Looking beyond obvious financial experts to consider individuals with relevant experience or consistent behaviors and teaching orientations often reveals mentoring opportunities that sometimes might be overlooked.
Remember that mentoring relationships typically develop gradually rather than forming immediately. Start small. Don't go tell your life story out the gate, but find those small conversations that you can really start. Beginning with specific limited interactions that demonstrate value exchange creates foundation for potential deeper connections rather than overwhelming potential mentors with comprehensive requests initially.
Effective mentoring provides something far beyond information alone. It creates personalized guidance, accountability, and emotional support that accelerates financial recovery beyond what isolated implementation typically achieves. Whether through individual relationships like Casey and I developed or distributed mentoring across various sources, this guidance provides crucial perspective during challenging rebuilding periods. Today, we've explored approaches to finding and working with financial mentors, with Casey providing invaluable perspective from our own mentoring relationship. We've examined why mentorship matters during financial recovery, also how to identify potential mentors aligned with your specific needs, strategies for building productive mentoring relationships, and ways mentoring relationships evolve through different financial phases.
If there's one message I hope listeners take away from this episode, it's that financial recovery happens more effectively through connection rather than isolation. Financial recovery is not meant to be done by yourself. Reaching out and having a mentor is a critical component to any type of financial recovery. The guidance, accountability, and support that mentoring relationships provide accelerates progress while creating meaning beyond individual financial improvement alone.
Casey, I can't thank you enough for joining us today for this profound impact that you've had on my financial journey. The guidance you provided during my darkest financial and personal period created a foundation for everything that's followed, and I'm deeply grateful for both your practical support and your ongoing friendship.
David, it's been my extreme pleasure to be part of this podcast. Watching your journey from those early kitchen table conversations and even now sitting at that same table to now helping others through this podcast has been tremendously rewarding. The greatest satisfaction in mentoring comes from seeing others not just recover, but eventually extend similar guidance to those facing their own challenges. So, thank you very much for allowing me to be part of this journey.
In our next episode, Redefining Financial Success, we'll explore another critical aspect of financial recovery: It's creating personal definitions of success beyond conventional external metrics. I'll share how bankruptcy forced me to reconsider what financial success truly means, leading to value-aligned priorities that have shaped my journey from recovery through growth towards independence. We'll explore problems with traditional success metrics, approaches for identifying your true financial values, building meaningful measurement systems aligned with your own personal priorities, communicating your financial values effectively with others, and then evolving success definitions through your different life and financial stages. As you move through the coming week, I encourage you to take at least one concrete step towards establishing or strengthening your own mentoring relationships, whether identifying potential mentors within your existing network, reaching out for initial conversations, or deepening current mentoring connections. These actions create foundation for accelerated financial progress through collaborative learning rather than isolated implementation. I'd love to hear about your own financial mentoring experiences, so if you're comfortable sharing, please visit realmoneypathway.com and let me know how mentors have influenced your financial journey. Your insights might help others seeking similar connections while shaping future episodes addressing specific mentoring questions. Thank you, Casey, for joining me as we explored the power of financial mentorship. Financial recovery happens more effectively together than alone. So until next time, I'm David Kim.
And Casey Robinson.
And remember, it's not just about money, it's about building your real money pathway to freedom. Thanks for joining me on the Real Money Pathway podcast. I'm David Kim, reminding you that financial success isn't about perfection, it's about progress. So subscribe now for more strategies, and remember, your journey to lasting wealth starts with the very next decision you make.